Hello and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. Today my guest is Georgie Leslie. She's CMO at Future Group, a superannuation-focused company that's leading the ethical investment movement with brands you might have heard of such as Future Super, Guild Super, Childcare Super, Smart Monday, Verve Super and Future Group Investment Management. Prior to this, Georgie was Asia-Pac Marketing Manager at Lonely Planet for 3.5 years, Head of Brand at REA Group, also known as realestate.com.au. She also spent 3 years in a scale-up called Good Human and is now applying everything she knows to superannuation. Welcome to the show.
Fantastic to be here. Thanks, Lindsay.
So tell me about the early days. How did you get into marketing and what's kept you engaged after all these years?
Yeah, great question. I am someone who, in all my school reports, if you ever go back and look, there's one word that stands out, and that is conscientious. Education in my household or my family was something that was important. So I was desperate to find something that I would like. You know, I spoke to the career counsellor, I went to the university open days, went and learned about what arts courses were and what advertising courses were. But the word marketing was just not something in my vernacular. It wasn't in my family. It wasn't in any one of my friends' parents that I knew. I didn't even know what it was. But what I did know was I loved creativity. I love being around creativity. I've got a very creative brother, but he and I always saw was really different because he was really good at making things, at the actual art of creativity and producing things, while I could never even draw, but I love being around it. I did a creative arts degree, but it didn't feel right for me. I love being around it, but I'm not a creator. I don't want to be a writer. And so I went and I sought out in my career, again, with this, I guess, conscientious approach. And so my first role was in an Australian production and distribution company. We created content in Australia using royalty-free footage from across the world, and we sold it into, over 150 countries around the world. And the model was low-cost entertainment. We had a lot of TV broadcasters across Asia and Africa who couldn't afford US content, but they needed content. I would never have expected I was sitting in sales. My view of sales was that dodgy, moustached car salesman. And so in some ways I fell into business, fell into commerce. Commerce, again, was not a word that was in my house growing up. I didn't know what business was. I look back now, I've had, almost 2 decades of experience. And that first 10 years was me pursuing roles in creative businesses. And so I started in that production company. I went on to book publishing then for about 6 years or so, first with MUP, Melbourne University Publishing, and then into Lonely Planet. I was in the business side, but in a creative pursuit. But I was in struggling businesses. I was in businesses that were in industries that were falling behind and weren't commercially successful, didn't have clear strategy. And so I made the shift into tech, and that's when I went to REA Group, who own realestate.com.au and another number of other brands. But I could see this thread of tech business equals progressive organisations. Progressive organisations, I think about when they put people first, where employee culture and learning is really important, where there's a hunger to do things differently. And I think that has been then a thread over the last 10 years as I've shifted away from being within creative businesses where marketing was a promotional arm to actually being in sort of tech-enabled and service businesses where marketing is the business driver. That it seems really obvious to me now that marketing was a career that would always be a good fit for me.
One thing I know about working with conscientious people is that they're usually quite high performing. Do you find yourself drawn towards hiring conscientious people, and what are the pros and cons?
It's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot recently in terms of my own bias towards achievement and goal orientation, and seeing that can hold me back. And I think this is often a thing that you can get to a certain stage in your career, earlier than where I am for many people, and you go, those same things, that what my reputation is or where I've been rewarded, I guess, got good feedback from peers or from managers in the past. That's not what's going to get me to the next bit. And so I'm questioning that a bit myself and having to be okay with not always delivering on time and not knowing the answers to everything. Your question is, does it impact how I hire? I'm sure unconscious or even conscious biases, yes. I think it's less conscientiousness. It's more accountability that I hire for. So if I can see it demonstrated in people that there's someone who takes accountability for what they do and takes responsibility, ownership, and is curious, because the curious is often is what's going to push you forward and it's going to make you lean out of your lane. And that's what I'd look for.
Something I know you're passionate about is building great teams. Is that because you've had great experiences of managers, or is it because you haven't and you want to be the change?
Yeah, both. Definitely both. I've been really lucky. I've been able to work with great leaders and great managers, but then I've also been in situations. My time with Lonely Planet is a really good example of it. I had a fantastic manager who was the head of Asia Pac sales and marketing, and he was a sales, a self-proclaimed sales guy. Fantastic manager. But what I was craving and lacking was leadership across the whole business. We were a global organisation. It's an Australian-funded travel content or travel publishing business from the early 70s. So this is in 2012. BBC own it. And during my time with Lonely Planet, we were sold to, I love the line that the PR release was like a recluse Kentucky billionaire. And so we went through this change. And in hindsight, I think I could be more sympathetic to the lack of what I saw as a lack of strategy and structure and leadership. I now know how complicated it is to run a business, let alone in those changing environments. But at the time, I was craving it. And then I think going from there to REA Group and seeing, layers of leadership there and having a fantastic manager there showed me, this is what this sort of leadership can look like. I think back to your question around what I love about teams is that, my experience is you could work for a brand or a product that you passionately believe in, that you would buy over again, but you can have a terrible time if you don't enjoy who you work with. It seems really obvious, but it's the importance of how you show up every day, the people you are spending your time with, the colleagues, especially your manager. If you're not getting something from that and you're not enjoying it, like, what a waste of time. Or maybe I should be so grateful that I get to enjoy that each day. But if I'm not, it's not the organisation I want to be in. It doesn't matter how much I believe in the purpose or what we're selling.
Do you believe that you're a better manager or better leader?
I think I'm a good manager. I think in some ways management is simpler. There's so many facets of leadership. And if I reflect on my own, I've had great operational leaders, but maybe they weren't inspirational. I've had people who are great. Oh my gosh, those people that you're so inspired, but they can't respond to an email. They can't follow up on a message or they can't hit a deadline, but their vision is, oh wow, I will follow you to the end of the earth. I would hope to be able to package up all those things in my leadership. But I think management there's almost a rule book for it. This is what the business is trying to achieve. This is our team's role in it. Here is what I expect of you. And then there's the other bit of probably the most important is show up consistently. And remember, if you're the manager, doesn't matter what you're going through. It doesn't matter if you're my team member, Lindsay. It's about you. And it's about what you're contributing to the organisation, how you're growing, what your desires are. How do I support that? A real unlock for me a few years ago, but it's certainly something that I have to deliberately bring front of mind. It is radical candor. I had a manager who I would say demonstrated radical candor, and I found it really hard at first. And then as the relationship built, the trust built. My view of when radical candor works, it's high trust and high expectation. And I hope my team would say I'm highly empathetic, but I have high expectations at the same time, and that's clear.
I am completely opposite to you. I find management really difficult and I find leadership, much more in flow. I learned a while ago that there's two human traits in leadership that if they're present together are sort of the main attributes of great leadership, which is strong and warm together. And usually you over-index on one over the other. And for me, over-index on strong. So being aware of warmth as the other element to great leadership.
Different individuals need different things from leadership. And that's the thing that always blows me away, that you can have 100 people in a room listening to a leader. Well, I can go out and go, oh gosh, I'm feeling inspired. And the person next to me can go, whoa, I'm feeling overwhelmed. So it's
100%.
Do you believe in changing your leadership style for the person, or do you think, you've got to stay to who you are?
I think as a leader, you do have to be yourself at your core. Otherwise, I think it's potentially fraudulent. I also don't think it's sustainable. But then maybe the context in which you turn up, you might be an outgoing person, but you would turn up to a funeral more solemn and read the room. And I think that's maybe the same for leadership. You have who you are as a person, but you tone it up or down depending on the context or the person that you're relating with.
That makes me think as well about the importance of shared leadership, and that often if you are in a founder-led business, there is a really clear leader. But in large organisations or, listed businesses, there's shared leadership. You've got board leadership, you've got executive leadership, you've got senior management leadership. What are the threads through all those leaderships for consistency? How do you as a business want to lead? What bits am I going to take? What do I actually really need to lead into, because that's who we are as a brand or a company? And what bits of myself do I bring in? And sometimes what bits do I need to park?
Yeah, and it's something on the podcast I've explored a lot around company values and how, especially from growing from founder-led businesses into fully established non-founder businesses, you have to have the ability to scale values or ways of doing things so that you understand what to expect within an organization. How you get there and the specifics and examples, I think, change per person or per leader, but the framework is there in terms of what's right or wrong. So you moved from Lonely Planet and you headed over to REA, is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Tell me why the jump and what you've gone from sort of scale up to significantly bigger business. What was the opportunity for you, or what did you see there?
It was a very deliberate shift, but it wasn't one that I would have expected a couple of years previous. As I said, because I was always pursuing creative paths. And I kind of accidentally did my MBA. And I think that was the catalyst for my mind opening a little bit. So I say accidentally because I was working at Lonely Planet and I was, working with the global marketing team. And it was really, I was like, this is real marketing. I'm seeing what the capabilities are and the different skill sets. And I felt like I'm missing a little bit of the academic here. I didn't ever study it. For me, I'm a learner. I want a bit more theory. And so I'd heard that Melbourne Business School had a really good reputation for executive leadership in marketing. And so I went to an information night and it was combined. It was about Masters of Marketing and Masters of Business Administration. And they got through the whole presentation and they hadn't mentioned the Masters of Marketing once. It was all about the MBA. And I sort of, any questions? And I put my hand up and said, can you tell us about the Masters of Marketing? And the person presenting said, look, it's pretty much the MBA, but you just do a couple of electives differently. And so I walked out of there going, I'm going to do an MBA. Like, okay. And for me, that was probably a launch pad for me to build my confidence. It helped me discover certain capabilities I had that I hadn't recognized as strengths because I thought everyone had them. And then I also just built my confidence in, I'm never going to be an accountant, but I'm so glad I did that accountancy module because I can have better conversations with my finance manager now. And so that opened up the world to me a bit of what the role of marketing is in businesses, what it can be. And it opened up, I guess, industries and what industries I could go into. And as I said before, at that time, technology businesses were starting to be more prominent. I was actively interviewing and seeking out really specific companies within the Melbourne area that I was attracted to. And REA was one of them. Now, unlike pretty much every other Australian, I'm not passionate about property, but I love that so many people are. And I think that's what got me in there. It was that reach that something like a realestate.com.au had. And so that took me into REA and onto a huge learning journey of an organisation that is not a large corporate, but, in my time we had, I think there was 600 or 700 staff when I started, and through a number of acquisitions and growth, by the time I left, we had, 13 or 1,400 staff. So it was big compared to Lonely Planet. And I think the things that we often find in technology business that attracted me was successful businesses. To go into a business that had 20% growth year on year. We had money, we had budget, which breeds of the opposite of what I found at Lonely Planet. We can test things, we can test and learn, we want to try things, we can be better. Just a completely different mindset, a job security feeling, I guess, for people. So rather than talking about what's happening in the organisation, you're talking about what can you do for the organisation.
I believe while you were at REA Group, you were both sort of in a head of marketing and then head of brand role. What did you learn about the importance of brand within a large organisation? What did you inherit and what did you change over your tenure there?
If I'm honest, I think a lot of our brand management wasn't great at REA. I feel like I can say that because I was responsible for a lot of it. I think we inherited red and we inherited a really long, annoying name, realestate.com.au, which looks terrible when you write it. But I think what I really learnt was we were the leaders in a category. If you live in Sydney, you'll be really aware of Domain. But if you live anywhere else in Australia, maybe you know Domain, but it's just not even in your consideration set. And if I'm perfectly honest, is there much difference between Domain and realestate.com.au? Not really. Like functionally do a lot of the same things, maybe some product features. In all our research, people would tell us, you're the red one. I just use the red one. I use the green one. And they couldn't actually say why. But I think we were challenged by the fact that we were market leaders. I think our market share was 70 or 80%. And that takes away risk-taking. It takes away desire to change too much. And so I think a lot of our brand messaging was reinforced, which is not wrong, but was reinforcing that we are the number one, and using that as this is why you should trust us. If you think about property listing sites, the barrier to switching is so low. All you need to do is type a different URL in, or you need to download a different app. We had our customers because we had a really great product, but we mostly had them because we had share of voice on their phones. The app was on their phones, and it's habit. You're the red ones. I just go in there, and you're providing a good product. So why would I change? But there's no monetary exchange. There's no reason that, and in actual fact, most people would use both. 90% of the time I use this one, and then I just spend 10% of the time checking the other one. And so we did spend a lot of time with who are we as a brand? What is our tone of voice? How do we want to show up? And I think we strayed a little bit. Historically, there was a bit of a humour in the tone of realestate.com.au. And I think in the recent year or two, I've seen some of the campaign work, I think they've brought that back again. But I think we probably lost our way a little bit there, and we didn't have the appetite to take risks and to build more brand assets.
You then hopped over to an organisation I hadn't heard of called Good Human. Tell me a bit about why the move and what Good Human does.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go to a startup, Lizzie. I had no intention. It's not that I hadn't thought about it. It's that I went, it's not for me. Startup's not for me. I had a redundancy from REA, as a number of us did at that time. So it was a really good opportunity for me to have the time and reset and think about, what do I value from work? What do I love? What's important to me? And a startup opportunity came through from an old friend of mine, and I just said, nah. And then a month later, he came back. Do you want to come have a coffee? Can I just tell you about what we're trying to do? And I was like, okay, I'll have a coffee. And Good Human is a SaaS platform for disability organisations and for people who are looking for support services. The more I learnt about the business and the mindset and what we're trying to do, I realised it aligned with my 5 things that I had written down that I was looking for in my next career. And I got really good advice from a friend of mine who'd recently made a similar change. And he said, you have to let go of the bit of your ego that's attached to working at a big brand like REA. You have to really go, well, where do I want to spend my time and what do I value? And so it was a really big learning for me. And against what I had expected, it's the most strategic role I've ever had. It's the role where I had to be most conscious of time, how I was using my time, most conscious of sequencing. How do you build a marketing org? What do you do first? What do you do second? What do you do third? Certainly made some mistakes and went, we went too early with that. We went too early with our sales strategy. The product wasn't at product market fit yet. And while there's other things, we built a brand identity that really cut through in the market. And it was that was a good decision to do, to invest in that early. So I learned so much from that startup experience about myself, I guess, and being able to, what's the connection between your own identity and work, but then also working in a purpose organisation. And I think that's what's then brought me in the next step of my career and going what it feels like to work for an organisation that is truly trying to make things better in the world without sounding too precious in it. But as a marketer, for me, I don't want to sell more units of something. I don't want to create a demand for something that I don't believe in. So that's what's become important for me.
As an 8th employee, I assume you would have been working quite closely with the founders of the organisation. How did you think about scaling from a founder mindset into a sort of, SaaS brand that stands on its own 2 feet?
Yeah, what I learnt was that it's okay to reassess priorities on a weekly basis. I'd come from an REA where we need to present to a board and to the market what our, 2-year plan. And I would say REA has scale-up vibes compared to one of the big 4 banks, for example. But I had to go to this thing of timing of going, I kept coming back to what is the vision of the founder and why? What is the customer problem or need that we're trying to solve for here? Okay, if that's it, but it's going to take us 3 years, 5 years to get there, what do we need to do right now? And so the mistakes I made, I think, was sometimes going, what do we need to do in a year or in 18 months? Because that was too hard to know. So my learning was where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years? And what do we need to do in the next 6 months to get that, if that makes sense? It was interesting, those 2 time horizons, but forget about the middle bit because there's too many unknowns and there's too many ways a startup can go. And I think if you stuck to that 2-year horizon too much, you'd miss opportunity to pivot and to move towards something.
How did your understanding or interpretation of brand change from large organisation, bigger budgets, a lot of team, and frankly, number one in terms of brand awareness through to a startup where, I personally don't think startups should invest in brand. I think it's a lot of money that often they don't have, or, there's other sequential steps to take before big brand work. How did you sort of recalibrate between the two, and how did you think about brand work in a startup context?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I'd worked in B2B, but it wasn't until I went to the startup, which was a true B2B SaaS, and I started learning about, so many, especially US-based SaaS businesses in the B2B. And I went, no, I haven't done this before. This is an absolute art. So that was great for me to go, okay, what are these steps that other businesses have taken? In terms of the brand, I think that's a really good insight from you that it's not something you should do, first of all. I oversimplify this, but with any time approaching in a new business, or even something I probably do once a quarter, is come back to the really simple diagnosis, strategy, execution. So the diagnosis bit is that really first step when you look at your 3 C's and you look at your customer first and foremost, you're looking at your own company and capabilities and vision, and then you're looking at what's happening in the competitor. So in my example with Good Human, I saw an opportunity there to have brand as a differentiator. I could see that the realities of disability organisations historically, brand identity and storytelling was not a strength. So I saw an opportunity. And so that's where I went, no, this is something that's worth investing in early, because this is what's going to get us cut through. And this is actually something that's going to make us stand out for the target audience, whether that's on the B2B or the B2C side. But I was at the same time really conscious of don't overinvest. Don't take 12 months to do this. Take 3 months to do this. And what are those elements we need now? And what are those things that we can evolve over time?
And how did you measure success? There was obviously the commercial uplift of the business growing, but outside of that, how did you know it was the right move to make to invest in brand as a differentiator?
I don't think you can ever have full confidence. And that's why I say there was mistakes we made along the way. And in hindsight, you go, oh, we went too early with that. We'd always set goals in terms of the commercial metrics, and we'd be looking at those monthly, quarterly, annually. Again, we reforecast a lot of those because what our targets were was shifting as we learned more about the industry and our role in it. But how did we look at the success of the brand? I think really it was feedback. It was feedback from the market, from customers, from competitors even, turning up at expos and events and having competitors or other businesses who might be competing in the same category but offering a different service or product and coming up and asking our advice.
So you land in a new company at Future Group, new role, CMO role. You've got these 5 different brands with various levels of complexity. Where do you start, and what's been your journey in your current role? How do you know which child to focus on the most?
Take a big breath and then take another breath. So in superannuation, please don't fall asleep. I would have before, and now I'm the person that just can't stop talking about superannuation. Future Super is the baby brand, the original part of Future Group, which has been around for 11 years now. And Future Super was started by Simon Shake and other founders, and Simon Shake is still our current CEO. And it was really a recognition of how much money is in the superannuation sector, and also the huge climate crisis that we continue to propel ourselves into, and going, wow, imagine if we could use these resources to solve for that. So very startup. And then I joined the business just over 2 years ago as we were finalising the acquisition of 3 new funds. And so bringing together 5 funds sitting under what we created as a corporate brand of Future Group. As you mentioned, we've got 5 different superannuation funds or brands, but we've also got investment management platform as well, where we can manage investments for other super funds that are more ethically minded. So first of all, I was entering financial services, which I have not been in before, let alone just financial services. It's superannuation. I suspect one of the most highly regulated sectors, as it should be. And I was coming in at a time that we were about to integrate 3 new brands. So I had to learn about a sector. I had to learn about 5 different brands. But most importantly, I needed to set expectations and goals for our team to be clear and to work through. And so it was overwhelming at times, but it was almost like there was so many unknowns that I became comfortable in going, well, you know what? I don't have all the answers and I can't have it. But wow, there's some really smart people who work here who have had their careers in superannuation. And also, I've had a career of other experiences. I know how different systems have worked, so I can bring that systems thinking into here. So again, I come back to the diagnosis, strategy, execution. And so it was really a process of doing the diagnosis across the company, the competitor set, the customer, the different sorts of customers we've got in our different brands, and then making some decisions and trying to make those decisions pretty quickly. And kind of the even over of make a decision quickly and with limited information rather than waiting to know everything and know that, you know what, if it's wrong, we can iterate, we can change. And so the journey has been 2 years of really setting up our foundations. So what's the marketing tech stack we need? What are the people we need? And that's been iterative. Here's what I think it is. We set that up. And then over the last 12 months, we've added a couple more roles because we're like, actually, we needed this. And we've shifted some roles across teams because actually structure doesn't solve everything, but it can be helpful. So that's been a real journey. And then today, and I think that's the foundations have paid off because now you can't have 5 favourite children. You can't spend 20% of your time in each of your brands. But it's quite clear to us, I think, where we do need to spend time. You know, it is across the team. We have different people who are focused on different brands and we have some people who are focused on all of them. And it's making those decisions. I don't want to even call them hard decisions, but choosing what we're not going to do.
How have you thought about the role of the master brand Future Group as its own brand? I assume some of your team would identify as working for Future Group rather than for a super brand itself. Have you put much thought and effort into that, or has it just been an organically manifesting thing?
We put a lot of thought into it. Whether we've activated the thoughts, I think that's still evolving, but it has a really important role to play. And we're constantly talking about the relationship between the Future Group corporate brand and Guild Super, for example, which is our corporate brand for people who work in the pharmacy industry. So what's the relationship? How much do we want members of Guild Super to know about? I mean, you can know about it, you know, that's our ownership structure, but how much do we want to remind them? You know, how do we use that? And it's really different dependent on the brand. I think about Smart Monday, which is our corporate brand. It's, you know, a brand that's been around for decades. It used to be part of the Allen Master Trust. The membership there is white collar workers. They haven't been part of Smart Monday because of the ethical and sustainable drive of Future Group. But that's where we are now. And so what is the story? How much do we want to connect them and not? And so we're really deliberate with when and how we use that. A really good example of where it is working really well and helping us is our childcare super brand, which is for early educators. It's a really hard time at the moment to be working in early education. It's in the news every day. It's really tough on both sides of the market. It's really tough for the educators and it's really tough for people who are running childcare centres. So what can the role of Future Group, knowing that we are an absolute purpose-driven organisation to drive impacts on climate change and social equality, how can we use our voice at that level? Because we're now we're managing 17 billion funds under management. We have a voice that gets listened to across the superannuation industry, but also with government. So what's the work that we can do to advocate with the government around some rights, especially around gender equity rights and work that should be happening in the childcare sector? In that instance, we really use Future Group brand and the childcare super brand really together to show that and to show the weight that's behind what might just be a smaller brand if it was just on its own.
Throughout the last few roles that you've held in more of a CMO capacity, how do you think the role of the CMOs is expanding or changing? Where do you think it has most potential for influence in the future?
I think in some ways it's easier to be a CMO within the context of the wider organisation. I feel like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I would be talking about trying to get a seat at the table and how do you create a good relationship with your CFO. And I'm sure everyone's experience is different in different organisations. But
there are certainly brands still figuring that out.
You know, how do we get more money? How do we ask for more money? And like we're moving past that a little bit because the expectation is higher for what the marketing team should be delivering on. The expectation is on that commercial driver, which I think is a weird thing to say because that is what marketing is always been and inherently. But even in my own experiences, it can be a promotional arm. It can be a colouring department. It can be that. But I think there's a higher expectation now. At the core, like the most important thing I think as marketers we need to do within the business is know everything we can about our customers and don't hold that to ourselves. Take that to the business and ensure that is driving business strategy. The buzzword of customer centricity, but that is our job. And I constantly have to remind myself that not everyone else is always thinking about the customer. Of course they're not in their functions. They're thinking about, thank God, our investment team is thinking about investment strategy. So I think that's the important thing. I don't think that's new, but I think we've probably got more license and maybe the ears are more open to it now.
That's great. There's certainly a lot of organisations that are, perhaps back in that 5 years ago, trying to prove this themselves and build relationship with the CFO for funding to invest in brand activity. So sounds like your own journey has been successful in, getting a seat at the table. And now it's continuing to prove the value of having customer voice represented in boardroom conversations.
I learned this at REA, that there was like almost a hunger from the board and the CEO to know how our brand tracking was going. And I was like, wow, that's a power. Isn't that great? And for me personally, from, this girl who was working in creative industries, I was like, oh, they want to know this. This is important. Okay, now I'm conscious about how I share that, because actually, should you be looking at brand tracking every month? I don't think you should. Not at a board level. So it's also, what are the metrics that are important, and how often do you share them and the results, and how do you use those to be able to provide a recommendation to the business and kind of go, oh, this isn't going well, or hey, we need to do more of this because this is working.
Do you feel like brand should be represented as a balance sheet value? Do you think it should be discussed as, a lever and as a opportunity, but also like what are the brand risks when making decisions at a board level?
Well, I think anytime an acquisition occurs, there's the intangible assets on there and brands lumped in. So it exists. I don't think we can pretend it doesn't exist, but it is challenging because it is hard to measure. The companies that have a strong brand, however you want to define brand, they are the ones that bounce back from times of crisis far quicker because of that. So it's a really hard thing to measure, and it's something that we're constantly doing. How do you advocate and go, we do need higher budget for brand building activity, especially when you've got small niche brands, specifically in superannuation, when superannuation brands are spending a lot of money in brand marketing, really just to tell you to move from this super fund to this super fund. We're not creating really more demand. We're just trying to steal from each other almost. And it's interesting. I'm not sure how many brands are seeing results or can really track the effectiveness of that spend.
I find it fascinating. What capabilities do you believe the next generation of CMOs will need to thrive?
Am I cheating if I say it's the same as it always has been? Because if we need to represent consumers and customers, we need to know what's going on in culture. We need to be interested in what's going on. We need to know what the cost of living crisis is having on people and whether that's relevant in whatever area you're working in. Like, we need to know what technology people are using and how people are getting information and making their buying decisions. So, of course, AI is a massive thing, not just on how we operate as a business, but I'm fascinated at the moment and to continue to watch how does it change consumer behaviour in terms of researching. And so you need to keep on track on what's happening in the world and what consumers are doing, but that's not new. That's something we've always had to do. And so I think it's that. And then it's, how do you get stuff done? How do you have a business first mindset, not a marketing first mindset? That's a really important one to me. Don't have an individual mindset, don't have a marketing, have a business first. What's the vision of the company? Where are we trying to get to? When do we want to be there? How's a mission? What are the steps towards it? What is the role of marketing in that? That's what a CMO needs to do. That's pretty much what anyone in marketing needs to do, I think.
How do you get people to care about superannuation, specifically people that are not at retirement age or maybe won't be for a little while? I've worked on super brands through my career. It's a really big challenge to get people to care. And I guess you've got an added opportunity, but also a layer of education around ethical investments and the type of future that you want to build for your children or your own future. There's a big chasm between like saying you care and then actually changing your super and putting your money where your mouth is, quite literally. How do you think about that? And what's your elevator pitch for caring?
Yeah, apathy is our biggest barrier to entry. We know that the four biggest drivers for consumers to think about switching super funds or to be driven to switch is investment performance, the heart, and what is the returns I'm getting on my superannuation. It's the cost. How much are you charging me to look after it and manage my funds? What's the member experience? If I call, are you answering my call straight away? Because often I'm not going to engage with you very often, but when I do, it's going to be pretty important. And then there's this brand broad thing that, captures, it's just something it feels like it's for me, is the sentiment the research says.
How important is sector-specific super in that last pillar? Is it the fact that if I work at a pharmacy and Guild Super is for me?
Yeah, so there's two questions there. It's like, what is the role of the actual brand and the connection to industry, and then how do we get people to switch? But the connection to industry, I think, is what the superannuation industry has built that demand on. It's the, we're a high vis, to work and all that advertising over, that's me, that's for me. great, decision made. I don't have to think about it more. It's shorthand for trust, I think. And that's probably similar for being in industry. So for us, Guild Super or Childcare Super, it feels right. Now we've got the challenge of, what if you leave those sectors? Why would you stay in these? It's our strongest and our weakest link is the names and our standing there. I think for Future Super and Verve Super, which is our gender equity focused brand in Verve, there's something different there. We have an opportunity to create demand, create a new sector. We know that 88% of people expect that their superannuation is invested ethically. As you said, we expect it, but what am I going to do about it? And so we're testing a lot of things at the moment around how do you create action? How do you go against that apathy? And we've been talking about hope recently and thinking that actually hope might be the way. And when we think about hope, it's not puppies and rainbows hope. It's hope that as an individual, I have my superannuation. This is mine to control. Yes, it feels like it's a government thing, but it's not. It's mine, and it's potentially the biggest investment I've got because I cannot afford to buy a home. So it's this power of this is mine. I can do something with it. And also hey, I can put this into something that aligns with my values and that I can believe it's going to make a change in the world. That's where we've got to target, I think, to break that apathy.
You mentioned at the start your own personality being quite conscientious. You also mentioned around now being in a leadership role, needing to continually back yourself. Thinking about both of those two together, where do you think the balance should sit between creative instinct and data-driven decision-making? It sounds like you've been on a journey through your career, as most people have. How do you think about the two, and do you excel in one over the other?
First of all, we know that the best creativity in a commercial sense comes off great insight, and great insight comes from data. So we are in business, we are not in art and creation, right? So that first and foremost, I think about that when I work with our creative team and our broader team. So I think you have to start with data and insight, but there's some sort of like feeling I get of the freedom that you get in creativity if you've got that really solid foundation. If you've got that insight, you've asked why 5 times, what are we trying to achieve? And you've got guardrails. And something interesting that I think our team reflects on is what we love about working in a regulated sector is the guardrails, because it's hard, and we have the most incredible compliance team that we work with. They are an extension of marketing. They often come up with the best ideas. But we've got these guardrails that we need to work through, and they're there for a reason. They're there for consumer benefit. We would always invest time in thinking big, and then bringing it in, but always coming to at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve with this single piece of communications? So I think at the end of the day, what people see is the communications or the creativity, but it's going to have the most impact if it is embedded in data where you've started.
Last question for me. What does success look like for you beyond the commercial metrics of your role? In a CMO role, how do you know at the end of the day that you've led well?
It absolutely comes back to people. Maybe that's obvious. And so there's different ways that you can test and evaluate that. We do biannual employee engagement surveys, which is just a really great opportunity to check in across the whole company and then get really good results and feedback from that about what's working really, really well, what are people loving, and where are we, we're still falling behind in that space. We need to work on it. And I've always really, really valued those surveys. So that's the formal. The informal, there's probably 2 elements. One is, what do people from other teams say about your team? If they're not saying anything at all, that's not a good or a bad thing. If they are saying something, it could be a good or a bad thing. But I think it's that reflection back of having someone in the finance team talk about someone in your creative team glowingly, with respect. That to me is like, there is nothing better. You're doing the right thing. And they're not talking about, gosh, that person's a nice person. They're like, gosh, that person came with a really structured approach to our meeting and really good questions and that sort of thing. And then I think that the second informal for me is, we had an example of it this week with one of the graphic designers. She would hate me telling this story, but they spoke up. We were having a meeting and reflecting on our Q1 results and our priorities for the next quarter or quarters, and it was an opportunity for anyone to say, are we missing something? Should we not be doing one of these things? And they jumped in, and they would be, one of the less work experience within our team. And they opened up a whole discussion about something we were missing and why it was valuable and how much time we should spend on it and how we bring it in. And so that to me is just such an example of, we've set up a good team. People feel like they're in a safe place. They can challenge. It's challenging of our work and our shared responsibility rather than challenging of a person per se.
Incredible. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing all of your varying career moments. I think, from startup to scale up to large organization, I think you've come in each time and diagnosed the job to be done and then worked to execute against it. And inspiring to hear.
Thanks, Lindsay. I've really enjoyed it.
My biggest takeaway chatting with Georgie today is the importance and simplicity of diagnosing the job to be done in the context of the stage of growth within the organisation. Sounds simple. I think it's rarely done well. When she was talking about startup work and brand as a differentiator, the business case was clearly there versus just jumping in and doing it because somebody likes creative. Conversely, in large organisations where perhaps operationalising brand hasn't been as successful as it could have been, diagnosing the how and the why and the context as being the number one player with Real Estate Australia and where to go from there. I love the simplicity of diagnosing and then working out the job to be done.